Hello and welcome to episode 27 of the Realtors. I'm David Blair. He's Trevin Perez. Trevin, what's happening?
Hey, brother, it's going great. It's another Friday. May is over in a day. Things are looking good. How's it going for you?
It's good. We took a few weeks off and we're back. Did you do anything with the kiddos or anything for? I know summer hasn't quite got here yet, but school's out. School actually gets out this week for us. What about you guys?
Yeah, we haven't done anything major or exciting. Memorial Day, you got to hit the beach, and the beach was great. Weather was amazing, even with a little rain overcast. You got to get out there, get that sun, look at that beautiful sea we have right here in our backyard. So yeah, that's it, man. I can't wait for the summer though, real summer to come, so we can do some vacation.
Well, it's hot. It's hot now. It's been and we're in North Florida. I'm in Northeast Florida. Maybe it's hotter where you're at. I mean, but it's been the average, probably the mid to almost the high 90s, for the last couple of weeks. We've had some rainstorms the last couple of days that have cooled it down a little bit, but it's been pretty tough. So I don't even know what it's going to be like, uh, you know, in the real part of summer here in the next and some of the hottest months when we get into July and August.
No, I agree. I agree because I don't know about you, but I'm in Orlando and our lawn is scorched. You got to run the sprinkler system a little bit more. The grass is dying. You're seeing bugs. It's a mess, trying to have that perfect HOA approved lawn, you know?
Yeah, exactly. So what do you want to talk about today? You've got kind of the rundown. We talked about some topics before we came on today. Some of the most pressing, I think, topics that are going on in our market today. What do you want to start with?
Man, let's start with the fact that buyers, let's talk about buyers. We talked about buyer mindset. I mean, it's a buyer market. What's going on there? Let's kick us off.
So so what do you think, in your opinion, what is a buyer's market? So I've seen several studies, and a lot of them say that if you go by time period as far as actual days on market, that anywhere between 0 to 60 is still a seller's market. 90 days is what they consider a balanced market. And then once we get over 90 days, days on market for inventory, that's truly a seller's market. And we've hit that number in our area here. Now, we do have some properties that are selling quicker than that. But for the most part, I think if you look in the majority of our areas, if you're looking at average days on market, we're approaching 90 days, which I would say that that qualifies as a buyer's market, in my opinion. What about you guys? What days on market are you at right now?
Well, I mean, first off, do you gotta deal with an attack occurring at your house? You got some background noise going on. Your studio is getting attacked by Jurassic Park.
That sounds like a duck. Actually, is what I've been told. Is that our Pomeranian sounds like a duck quacking, but that's him. That's him barking at somebody. So it sounds like from the garage door that I can just hear opening. One of the kids came home, and instead of going and talking to the dog and quieting him down, they stand there and look at the dog and wonder why he's barking. So the next
Oh,
segment will be me yelling at a kid who's not yelling at a dog. So we'll make the best of it.
that's on our commercial break. All right. Well, so interestingly enough, my opinion of a buyer's market slightly skews from less of a days on market scenario to how much inventory we have on the market. And for the early part of this year, we for the longest we had low inventory. Now we have easily 6 months of supply of listings on the market, and it looked like locally it looks like nationally, the data is saying that we have a large number of listings that are sitting. We have more sellers today waiting to sell than we have buyers ready to buy.
Yeah.
So that's the situation that we're seeing over here.
Yeah, I feel that. I went out with a buyer yesterday. We looked at probably 6 properties all within the same area. He actually wanted to target homes that had been on the market for 90 plus days. So I think we're going to start to see that as well. We're going to see that as a little bit of a buyer strategy, to where buyers are saying, okay, send me the properties that have been out there the longest, because the feeling is that those are maybe the most motivated sellers. Whether they are or not, I told the buyer yesterday, his question to me almost after every property was, what do you think that the seller would take for this property? We don't know the answer to that. We can go out and we can take a look at the comps and say, okay, based on the comparables that have sold within this area, this is what the property should sell for. But there's a lot of motivating factors behind what the seller will accept for that property, what their payoff is, where they're going after that, what do they need from the sale of that, so there's too many variables in there to just be able to go in and say, okay, they're emphatically going to take this amount. So that's what I'm running into. And I think a lot of agents are probably experiencing the same thing. But we're starting to see buyers realizing that inventory, like you said, is starting to stack up. So they've got their choice of what they want to look at. It surprises me a little bit that some buyers aren't ready to move forward and kind of pull the trigger, because the interest rates, we've talked about the interest rates for the last 30, 60, 90 days. And that relief that we thought was going to happen hasn't. And real estate rates have stayed pretty much where they started at during the year. I don't know that they're any less right now. I think I spoke with one of the mortgage reps the other day. VA is still kind of leading the way as far as being the lowest rate available. But everything else, I haven't seen any kind of significant decrease or increase. And even the 2-1 rate buy down that came out as an incentive of being able to give some relief. I'm being told, I'd like to hear your opinion. I'm being told by a lot of my lenders, they don't think it's worth it. I mean, and they're selling this product, but they're saying they don't think it's worth it, just simply because of the money involved and what you have to pay to buy that rate down. What are you hearing?
Well, so sticking within the conversation of buyer mindset, I'm seeing that these buyers are still waiting for something big to happen. And the other shoe, like you said, is just not going to drop. Rates are going to stay the same. And wow, why does my head look like it's chopped off? Sorry, I just noticed something there.
Your
But
head
yeah,
actually always looks that way. So,
it always looks like that. Thank you for sharing that with me. I didn't realize that it was a natural deformity, you know. But yeah, no, there's a lot of pent up demand, but I'm noticing most buyers are not as qualified, ready to buy as they would like. Maybe
mhm.
low on cash flow for down payment or rate buy downs, or other circumstances like, extra payments or credit cards they have to pay off. Because now I'm seeing a lot more people show up to the closing table with a check in hand to pay off some debt as part of the qualification that the lender required them. So I was like, oh wow, and yeah, rates have not budged. Mid 6% range, unless you get something special. And regarding the 2-1 buy down, I have a local lender that we use at our brokerage who seems to be pushing the buy down only from the perspective of, hey, instead of asking this seller to take a $50,000 drop in price or $20,000 drop in price, because we know buyers want significant discounts off the price today. How
Mhm.
about look at a rate buy down that the seller pays for? So maybe you'll get that 20 off. Maybe it turns into 10 or 15 with the help of the sellers paying for it, as a byproduct versus just a straight up cut in the price. And so that's kind of what I've been seeing more of lately is that conversation. But I think overall buyer mindset is the economy is really tight. You know, if the supermarket is getting more expensive and the gas is getting more expensive, purchasing a home is getting a little challenging. So it's just
Yeah.
interesting to see what's going on. We need a roundtable with buyers, have like a kumbaya.
Well, I think it's a little so going back to what you said about the rate buy down. I think depending on who pays for it, it may make sense. The lender I spoke with was speaking in terms of if a buyer was going to pay for that. But you're right. If a seller can give that as an incentive, they keep their price range in play as far as where they want to sell at. And then maybe just look, instead of reducing drastically, kind of give that relief to the buyer. It is a little bit, I think, of kind of kicking the can down the road, because I think some of the scenarios work is 4.9 for the first year, then maybe 5.2, 5.5 for the second, and then that third year it just kind of caps out at what we're seeing rates are now. So I think the plan behind that is that rates will go down in 12 to 24 months. That's kind of what you're betting on. I think the fear is that ultimately it does reach that 6.5, that we're at right now. And I think that's the concern for a lot of buyers, is that the figures on mortgages are, that $400,000 house at 3.5 or 4%, that payment's a lot different at 6.5%. It's just not as affordable. But there again, we go to affordable housing and say, okay, well, let's look at the price range. That's what I'm not seeing yet. And I think that's kind of interesting for my area, because it would be great if you could just simply say, okay, well, I can't afford a $450,000 home at 6.5%. So I'm just going to look for a lower price. But you still, for what you get, that drastically changes if you're dropping that down to a more affordable mortgage. And what would you say that would be? If we're trying to say, okay, at 400,000 at 6.5%, if you're trying to have that same mortgage payment that you would have had at, say, 3 to 4%, what are you dropping that by? 150,000 or more, maybe somewhere in there.
Yeah.
So now you're looking at 200,000. That's a huge difference. And we haven't seen price adjustments go low enough to where there's that same comparable inventory, because you're looking at, especially in my area, you're looking at two completely different homes, areas, neighborhoods, everything. If you're looking at something that was 4 versus something that's at 2 or 250, you see the same thing in your area?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, with some variations and nuances, which this takes us into one of the other parts of our conversation that ties nicely to this is, how are sellers dealing with this? How are sellers dealing with the fact that the buyers are in control? They want deep price cuts, and days on market hurt. Days on market almost is it's a double whammy, because it's not a fair estimate of condition, price, location. Like it's just not fair to the sellers. So how do we help the sellers deal with this?
Well, it's a cold reality that they're facing right now. And when you say feel sorry for, I can go back and I can kind of look at each side, and I can look at where buyers were 3 years ago, and that they were forced to pay at or above list price. They were forced into dropping the appraisal contingency, dropping a home inspection contingency. Sellers were truly in the in the power position at that time. So I mean, it's a little payback right now, in that it's not what it was 3 years ago. I think if you have a good home, you market it and price it correctly, and it's in good shape, then ultimately those properties still sell. When I look at inventory that's on the market, yesterday, for example, of the 6 properties that we saw, I could probably write something, a little mini report on each one of those as to, this is probably why that property's not selling. And it was either the same thing it always is, either price, condition, or location. Location being one of those things you can't change, but there were some conditional issues with a lot of those properties for where they were priced at. A lot of times you can adjust those too. If you can't adjust the condition, you can adjust the price to compensate for that. And I don't think some of those sellers have done that. And this is just not a market to where you can do that. The thing I'm experiencing is I look at my inventory, existing listing inventory, and you want to get activity on it. You want to get it moving. But the market is, I think, resetting about every 90 days or less. because inventory is starting to stack up. So what I'm encountering is having conversations with sellers about where we started, and maybe that was 30, 40, 60 days ago versus where we're at right now. But if you haven't had any activity within a 30-day time period, that pretty much tells you everything you need to know. If your property was in good condition, you price it according to the comps when you started out, and you're just not getting activity, that tells you that the buyer market has rejected that pricing, and that you have to make some adjustments. And I think those are some tough conversations I'm having with sellers right now, because some of those sellers purchased within the last couple of years, and they're really not in that same position as sellers were 3 or 4 years ago, that had the luxury of that bubble that we had, of where prices just skyrocketed in 2020. They bought within that time period. They bought within 2020 through the last couple of years, and they're just not seeing that same return that a lot of those other sellers were, that maybe purchased like 5 years ago.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think that for buyers who have bought in the last 3 years trying to sell, you're right. There's a dose of reality check that they have to swallow that comes at a discount, an automatic discount, because they did buy at a higher price. Um, I think though, for those sellers who have had their properties for longer or prior to that bubble regarding the COVID years and all of the excitement that sellers were in control and asking their any price that they want and able to get competitive offers, they're in a weird place. Like I have a client who I did a couple of tours for just to assess the property conditions, their Airbnb properties, their condos. Two were condos, one was a single family. Single family is probably a little easier to justify some strategy around. Condos can be tough, as we know in Florida. You got so many apartments up for sale. And when you start comparing condition to what's like for like, right? Did they update the old bulb style 1980s 1990 lights in the bathroom? Is it still Formica? It's like when you start trying to discount for those things that were not updated, you try to come up with a price to define it and quantify, okay, here's why, here's where we should go. But then the buyer market is like, no, I want more. And it's
Right.
like, how do you play that game, especially if you're sitting on the market for 4 or 5 months? So I'm almost at the point I'm telling people 6 months minimum, but gosh, I would almost be reluctant not to preface and say, let's have an attitude that we're going to be here for a year.
Hmm.
Run it like you always do. We'll work the sell it on the background behind the scenes, but let's have as little expectation of there being success, because the way this market is going. Now, obviously, we could see some changes coming soon, and this is one of the talking points we had in here, which speaks to the election and our favorite media companies. There's going to be some bills passed that are going to open up more purse strings, right? And so we're going to save you from having to confess your love or your apologies on any topic. I just joked with you off camera about it, but the reality is, the president should be passing a law expecting to put money back into the economy, which I'm
Hmm.
hoping would expect it would drive sales again. And this is happening in July,
Hmm.
prime season, right? For our market is summer and spring, since
Hmm.
spring is starting off kind of slow. I mean, what's your take on that?
I think that, obviously, I think there was a perception that with the new change in administration, we were going to have some immediate changes, and I think I'm included in that group that felt we were going to have changes quicker than what things have transpired. It seems like the administration has focused on other items, And they don't control that directly. I know that. I know that there's no president that can come in and say, okay, we want interest rates to roll back to X amount. I know that's not going to happen. But I did think that the buyer confidence would be greater, with a new administration and working on our current economy. But what we've seen is a steady increase in goods and services, and then a little bit of a distraction in regards to talks about tariffs and things like that. That a lot of us are, we're worried about, you know, small picture. We're not looking at tariffs. I don't talk to buyers on a daily basis and have concerns about what the tariffs are in China. They're concerned about what their mortgage payment's going to be. They're concerned about their kids that are going to college and are they going to get into schools, and if they don't have prepaid college plans, where are they going to pay? That's their concern. So I think we've kind of gotten off topic with that. So hopefully with the things that are transpiring and may come up in July, that may help. So I do have this take just to kind of wrap up that segment. We talk a lot about what kind of influence and what kind of control real estate agents have on the market. And if you ask, for the most part, I think a lot of realtors would say, well, we don't have a lot of influence on the market as far as pricing and things like that. Buyers dictate that. Buyers willing to pay, the price is determined by what a buyer's willing to pay. But I would say this, on the selling side, I think if you're an agent and you have listings that are sitting and that they're overpriced according to the market, and you're allowing those properties to sit there without having any type of consulting, any kind of consultation with your seller about why the property's not moving, then you're doing a disservice to our market. Because in my opinion, you're crowding an already crowded market with overpriced properties that are not going to sell. And think about that. So if every agent today took a look at their existing inventory and realistically said, this seller is not motivated to the point to where they can reduce this property to the price that it needs to sell, then we're going to go ahead and just take that property off the market. Well, that's less inventory. That's less to choose from. And I think that, that to your point earlier about buyer demand, well, now you start to see some things move because you don't have that noise of additional listings that are out there. Another disservice is when you look at those listings. We saw properties yesterday that had day counts of 200 plus days on the market. That's a long time on the market. And when you see that, and without price adjustments, it's one thing if you start to look at that and say, okay, well, they've made some price adjustments, so they're kind of chasing the market at this point. But a lot of those had just sit there on that market, on the market for 90, 120, 180 days without any type of price adjustments at all. And that tells me that the agent's not being, they're not being honest with that seller and just having conversations that just say, we've passed the point for that price range. It's not going to sell at that. So that's my little, soapbox speech to other agents that are out there, and that have those talks with sellers and just be honest with them. At the end of the day, if you have an overpriced listing, it's not going to sell. We both know that. Every agent has been in that position. And sometimes you want to give the seller the benefit of the doubt, and maybe they've done additional updating that other properties haven't done. But at the end of the day, if it's just sitting there and it's not moving, it's a disservice to that seller. Have an honest conversation with them. Say, this is where we need to be. And if you're not ready to make that adjustment, then maybe we just pull it down. Maybe we just take it off the market for right now, and then we wait for a better time to sell where maybe the values are a little more in line with what you're looking for.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah, I think you're right. Where the moral of the story is, for sellers, agent, be as truthful, forthright as possible. While there's great interest in working with you in the beginning, without proper communication and follow up and honesty throughout, you're going to cause that relationship to sour. And so as agents, we don't get paid until you close. So, we want the goodwill, and joyous relationship to stay strong from day one to day 210. And the
Sure.
key to that is honesty and forthright communication and regular check-ins, and doing those comping exercises where you're following up and showing up that you're trying to do something. Because yeah, it's funny, I do a lot of calling and I talk to a lot of people who were on the market previously with no success. Number one thing is they're like, my agent didn't do anything, didn't
Hmm.
communicate, help
Sure.
me, do an open house, like nothing, you know? So it's like, all right, that's how we got to avoid this. And especially now, because we know it's not going to sell readily. Like, I have a call in the afternoon and I got to, I hate to do it in our romance stage, our infatuation stage, right? We went on our first date. I did a couple of tours. You're seeing value, but I got to
Hmm.
hit you over the head and let you know this isn't the prettiest, most gorgeous thing that's coming on market. We got to
Yeah.
be somewhat realistic and fair with each other
Hmm.
because everything I do for you is for free. So obviously, I have a vested interest in getting you sold. But
Sure.
in order to get sold, we have to be able to agree about what the reality is. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's just a funny thing about our business. You got to sell them on the listing, you got to
Hmm.
sell them on your decisions, you got to
Hmm.
sell them and coach them and keep them motivated throughout that process. Then when it's under contract, you still got to keep them motivated to stay in the deal and say, not just bleep it, I don't want that deal.
Yeah.
Just to get them to the closing table. It's an interesting experience. So let's see.
Well,
So
those,
what's
yeah.
next? Huh?
What do you got next? What do you got next on here?
Yeah, so let's see here. We talked about seller price adjustments. We talked about buyer mindset. We talked about the sellers, the flood of inventory. Let's see. What else did our audience tell us to talk about? We even talked about the topic of you regrettably having some remorse about, which you glanced over like a well trained politician. Um, okay, let's talk about we talked about market rates. We sort of
Yeah.
danced on the topic of the R word. So
Mm.
so for our audience, as a 20 plus year veteran, Blair is not a fan of the R word.
No.
And I don't blame him. It messes with our psyche. Like, talk to us from your perspective about why you don't want to feed into that conversation at all. As an agent, what's your advice to other agents?
Well, it's one of those things that you can't control really. Whether we go into a recession or not. Yeah, I
You
said
said
it.
it.
Said it. Whether we go into that or not, it just depends on. I think it depends on what side of the fence you're on. If you're a buyer right now, then obviously you're wanting to use that as kind of ammunition to get a seller to reduce their price. If you're a seller, you're not wanting to hear that. But at the same time, at the end of the day, you don't have to sell for the most part. Now let me retract that statement a little bit. For the most part, unless you're going through a death, divorce, a relocation with your job, something along those lines. Those are events that cause you to have to relocate, to have to move. Um, Wanting to go to a different neighborhood is a want; it's not a need. So you have to kind of look at that and determine, what's the true motivation of why you're actually leaving. Because at the end of the day, you don't have to. And I think we all hear that. I mean, I know you've heard that. I hear it almost every seller I've spoken with, for 20 plus years, have said the one thing: I don't have to sell my house. And I think that's in an effort to tell the agent that I'm putting you on notice that I don't want to be told what I can sell my house for. I don't want you to pigeonhole me into this is what I can sell my house for, because I don't have to sell my house. And they're right. You don't have to do that. But back to the R word, I'm trying to kind of bring that full circle. It's really irrelevant as to what's going on in the market if you have to sell. if you have to sell, if you've gone through one of those things, death, divorce, relocation, what's going on in the market, what's going on in the world is just it's going to go on whether you buy or sell that house or not. So it doesn't change that. So it doesn't have an effect. Sure, it does. It has an effect on buyer confidence, on whether buyers are confident in where their jobs are at, how much they're going to pay for school for the kids, electric, groceries, all of those things. Are they going to be able to afford that mortgage? So in the long run, it does have that effect. But I just don't think or feel there's a need to dwell on it, because it's out of our direct control. There's nothing that you can do as an agent in regards to marketing that property that's going to make it recession proof.
Yeah.
You as a seller, you can present a good property in good condition, listen to your agent, and price the property correctly and get good marketing towards it. And just to go back to what I was saying earlier about making those price adjustments and those conversations, you do have to have that conversation, I think, with the seller in regards to what you're doing. You can't just say, hey, I put it on the MLS for 30 days. It didn't sell. We need to do a price adjustment, which I think to your point, when you speak to sellers and they said, my previous agent didn't do anything, I think that's the perception, is that they put it on the MLS. They didn't do anything else. They didn't market it. They didn't do any of these other things. And maybe they did. But as you and I both know, if you put a property out there that's overpriced, or if it's in poor condition, you're just not going to get activity. And if you're not getting activity, any amount of advertising you do is not gonna overcome that. So again, you have those conversations. You say, okay, look, this is what we're doing. We're trying to market the property, but it's falling on deaf ears because we're priced too high, or the condition is too poor for where we're priced at. So that's a sidestep around the recession question, but that's my answer. I'm sticking with it.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's great because I think that it covered a nice, you know, nice, well-rounded perspective for agents to think about, and for buyers and for sellers, right? Obviously, buyers want to use it to their advantage. Sellers are a little scared of it. Agents are scared of it too. I look at it too as like the R word is almost like a negative mindset, or
Mm-hmm.
it gives you the excuse to just not work, not put the
Sure.
effort in,
Mm-hmm.
because you're like, oh crap, it's not going to go anywhere. I'm not going to sell anything. So it's almost like a self-perpetuating,
Mm-hmm.
spiral down to hell. And then it's like, well, that's why I'm not selling anything, because my mentality is I'm following what the news says, and the news is
Yeah.
always negative, right? And it's interesting what you were sharing too. I thought about some sellers who will contact me or will talk because I want to stay close to them when they make the decision, and they're always like, "Oh, how's the market doing right now, Trevin? Like, is now the time?" And I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, honestly, you need to be on the market already before the time
Yeah.
sparks. If you wait, you
Mm-hmm.
might pass that window. Like, who knows what this window is going to look like this year? Especially given where it's been. If it does spike, you're late. You're going to miss out. So you
Yeah.
really should sit on the market, even if you're forced to be on there for 200 days. At least make sure your agent is doing enough activities around marketing and all these other things we talked about, um, just to spark more marketing and conversations around your property, so at least on a monthly, weekly basis you can feel like that agent of yours is actually contributing to your insights, your value on life. It could suck, but at least you know that, man, it sucks. They're not going to get paid, but they sure go out their way to provide me insightful information on a regular basis.
Sure.
So,
Sure. If you have
yeah,
buyers, it's interesting. If you have buyers, the typical question I get is, are we at the bottom of the market yet? And to your point exactly, you don't really know when it is. You know when it was. You can look back typically in just about any real estate market that has gone in these peaks and valleys, and you can look and say, okay, well that time period, you look back and say, well that's when things started to turn, and then the market started to go back up and correct. But if you're not actively in the market at that time, then you don't get to take advantage of that. You can just kind of look from the sideline and say, okay, well that's where prices started to come back up. That's why we all look back at properties and say, man, if I would have bought this, 15, 10, 10, 15, 20 years ago, it would be worth this much now. So it's if you're actively out there trying to buy a home right now, do your homework, have your agent, do their job for you, and just take a look at all of the factors, how long it's been on the market, the adjustments that they've made, the condition. But all those things aside, the buyer that I was out with this week is, do you like the house? Is this somewhere that you want to live? I mean, it's great to get a good value. Everyone wants that. Everyone wants a good deal. Everyone wants to buy something and feel good about what they bought. No one wants the feeling of, man, I overpaid for something and this is worth less than what I paid for it. But at the end of the day, does it meet your needs? Does it meet your family's needs? For the area that you want to live in. It's tough for me sometimes when I see buyers that are looking at property as that, because some do. Some look at it that it's strictly as an investment. But I think about it and I say, okay, do you like the area of where we're at? Oh, I don't really care for the area, but I like this house, which is great. But at some point, you have to come outside. You have to come out of the front door. You have to go to the grocery store. You have to go to the gas station, all those places that are around where you live. So you need to make sure you're happy in the area that you're in, as opposed to just, it was a really great deal and I run to the car. I run to the car every morning, and I don't go by any of the gas stations or any of the grocery stores near me. I shop on the other side of town. So I don't think that's something that any of us want to do.
Yeah, no, I agree, and it just takes me back to a client I lost. I lost a buyer. The husband and I were in a great place. His wife was flying into town. She met with a Zillow agent. That day one, she fell in love with a house. Prior to that, though, I spent 2 or 3 hours with the guy explaining to
Mm,
him my process, how we're going to look at the location, figure out the neighborhood, the schools, shopping, jobs. Like, let's get a real deep understanding of the community and the neighborhood because you're not from here, you're from up north.
yeah.
And wife fell in love with a house. He's like, oh, we're going to just move forward with this. Thanks for your time. And then his brother knows my wife, and they start talking about something, and she's like, yeah, that's not a great neighborhood. And he's like, why didn't you say something? She's like, because your realtor should have told them that,
Yeah.
right? Like, forget about the great deal. And maybe the house was such a great deal because of the neighborhood was going down, right? But yeah, it's a very bizarre process, and I think that's part of the challenge and why we see sellers that want to sell 2 years later because they didn't
Mhm.
thoroughly make the most educated, best decision that could benefit them for the long run, or at
Mhm.
least a 5 to 10 year period.
So where do you? That's an interesting question. So where do you weigh in on that as far as when you're showing property to a buyer and they've asked to see a home? I mean, Northeast Florida, where I live, I was born and raised here. Northeast Florida is made up of Duval, Clay, St. John's, Nassau, Baker County. With the exception of Nassau, I've lived in just about all those counties at one time in my life. So I'm very familiar with the area here. So any area of town, for the most part, I can kind of tell you, okay, well, this is a little bit of what the demographic is like. This is the buyer seller profile, whatever the case is, within that area. But we're limited as to going back to my early pre-licensing days. There's a thing called steering, which we're not allowed to do, which is basically where you're trying to literally steer buyers into a particular neighborhood, or steer away from a neighborhood. So you're kind of caught a little bit in the middle of what you can and can't say, especially if it's opinion based. So how much do you share? Now, if there's something that I know for a fact, I'll give you an example. One of the properties I showed yesterday is in a school district that the high school has just been, it's been an average to poor school over the last 10 to 15 years. It just has been. It's got very poor ratings. It's one of the reasons why a lot of sellers that within that community that I've worked with personally moved out of that community. It's a great community, but their kids would have also eventually end up going to that high school. And the high school's terrible, quite honestly. Had a lot of fights and things like that. They were put on YouTube years ago. So it's just not a great school. And I don't mind telling people that. I tell them, I said, do you have school kids? Do you have kids that are school age? If so, if the plan is for them to go here, that's something you probably need to look into. We're in an area where you can pretty much go. You don't have to go within your school zone. We have magnet school programs to where you can go outside of that school zone. But if it's something in-house, then obviously that's going to have an effect. But how much do you share or not share with regard to that with buyers?
Yeah, so I guide them to the resources of greaterschools.org. And I tell them, even if you don't have kids going to school, you
Mm-hmm.
can get a great idea of a community just based off of the school grades,
Yeah.
performance, the reviews. Because, yeah, I tell them I can't tell you this neighborhood's great or bad or
Mm-hmm.
good. I can tell you where great resources are available publicly, so you could do your own education, And
Yeah.
what's nice is I notice our favorite Z word that we don't like to say. They have a resource connected to greater schools. They also have another tool. Is it Trulia? I think their partner product Trulia shows
Mm-hmm.
crime in the neighborhood. So, you have a lot of assets in our real estate world that's public
Mm-hmm.
knowledge. And so, what I try to do is just I guide them toward that information so they can make better decisions. So I don't have to get into conversations about, he said, she said, or
Sure.
Jerry Springer kind of stories, or
Mm-hmm.
just like you face it, right? When you told me about the areas you lived, I hear Duval. I'm like, Duval, Duval County, it brings off a certain connotation about the area. It might not be true, but
Mm-hmm.
that's what you assume.
Yeah.
So yeah. Well, hey man, I think that this has been a good episode. And
I think so.
I mean, huh?
I think so. I think they're all good episodes, though.
Well, I think some are always better than others. We do get raving reviews from all of our fans. I do tell people, please give us 5-star reviews, comment on our page, subscribe, just to help the algorithms to perform better, to get us more recognition around the world. Please, prayer hand emoji. Uh, so sign us off, Dave.
Well, that's all I've got today. I think again, I think we covered a lot of topics today. I think we put some good information out there. Thank you again to our audience for continuing to follow and support us. If there's any new topics you'd like to hear, just throw them in our email, throw it on our page. Make sure to subscribe, like, and follow us, and we'll see you next time.
Take care.